Okay, so the New South Wales Major Projects Offsets Policy, do we have folk that can talk about that?
Yes, I do. Just bring them to the table.
Thanks, Mr Tregetha. Can you explain for me the level of accreditation that's proposed for that policy under the draft conditions policy of your department?
So the New South Wales Major Offsets Policy, is that... Sorry, Senator, could you repeat the question?
So my understanding is that your department has issued a draft conditions policy.
That's correct.
What does that say in relation to the New South Wales Major Projects Offset Policy?
So the draft conditions policy recognises at this point in time 3 New South Wales offset approaches as being endorsed for the purposes of that policy.
Okay, so it accredits the New South Wales Major Projects Offset Policy.
Endorses those projects.
Endorses?
Yes.
Accredits? Not accredits, just endorses?
Sorry?
Much of a muchness?
So, and what the conditions policy does, in effect, is it sets out the way in which the department... so the first thing it does is it sets out the way in which the department will approach the approval process for projects that have been assessed under that accredited, well, the endorsed policies, the 3 endorsed policies with New South Wales. And so what that means is when a project has been assessed by New South Wales under the current assessment bilateral agreement, and as part of that assessment, the project's proponent puts forward an offsets requirement that meets the requirements of any of the 3 endorsed policies, then the policy sets out that the Commonwealth would accept that offset for the purposes of the EPBC Act requirements around the protected matters. In addition, it also provides for other projects in New South Wales that are being assessed by the Commonwealth, so that don't fall within scope of the current assessment bilateral agreement, where those projects also are compliant with, so propose and are compliant with any of those 3 endorsed policies, that the Commonwealth would accept that as the offset requirement for the EPBC Act.
Would that abrogate the need for an approval as such?
No, there still must be a Commonwealth approval.
Why then does option 1 say that no conditions by the Commonwealth would then be attached?
Under options, so the options you're referring to are in effect, under the projects that are processed under the conditions policy, where it's determined that those projects are effectively assessed by New South Wales under the assessment bilateral agreement, and where they have met the requirements, so where the New South Wales conditions meet those standards, so including those offset, any of the 3 endorsed offsets policies, then as far as possible, in terms of streamlining environmental regulation, the Commonwealth would not seek to add any additional conditions. There is still a requirement.
Even it didn't relate to offsets? No additional conditions at all?
Well, any project that is referred to the Commonwealth. So you're missing the consideration step, I think, prior to the hierarchy of no conditions, 1 condition, or many conditions, which is to determine whether or not which of those 3 approaches apply, and which takes you down a pathway. If there is a condition required on an unrelated, so it's not an offset condition, then that condition would need to be applied. That can still be applied under the policy.
You can still put on other conditions. Absolutely. As long as they don't relate to offsets. So that sounds to me, on that first pathway of, okay, your offset conditions are fine, we don't care anymore, that sounds to me like an approval bilateral by stealth.
I disagree, Senator. So there is still an approval step required by the Commonwealth. What we're doing is we have, for the purposes of both the conditions policy and the revised assessment bilateral agreement with New South Wales, for the purposes of both those pathways, what we've done is we've undertaken an assessment of the New South Wales offsetting approaches, following which 3 of those approaches have been endorsed for use because we believe that they meet the standards required under the EPBC Act.
I reckon there's, and putting my environmental lawyer hat back on, I reckon someone will challenge that in court, because the HSI case of the federal court in whenever it was, 2003 or something, says you can't just do a sneaky process, you've got to follow the processes in the Act. And this sounds like a backdoor way of achieving accreditation of an approval phase, because the conditions are at the approval phase. So is there anyone in the department that's looking at your legal liability for following an unusual course of action that the
Senator,
Act does not
in
set out?
undertaking any of our activities, whether it's an individual project approval, whether it's consideration of endorsement of a policy of a state, whether it's accreditation under an approval bylaw, of course we do legal due diligence on the proposal, because fundamentally we're also very concerned with providing regulatory certainty for industry and for communities.
Yeah.
Senator,
Okay.
just to be clear though, as Mr. Giudice said, it doesn't remove the decision point for the Commonwealth Minister in relation to approving a decision, and the policy itself states up front that it's designed to provide guidance on setting conditions. The Commonwealth Minister and his delegates, or the decision maker, retain the discretion to make decisions considering the particular circumstances of each project. So the policy doesn't bind
Doesn't seek
any
to
of the
bind.
decision makers.
Okay, well, that's important. What's the risk assessment framework that underpins that draft policy not publicly available?
So, Senator, I assume you're talking about the system that
conditions
we've developed for assessing risks associated with compliance matters. We're in the process of taking a look at how do we use, again, as guidance, our analytical tools to better indicate what sort of level of effort we need to put behind various assessments. And because that work isn't finished, that is not in the public domain at this point. That being said, Mr. Gaddis can talk a little bit about some of the work that CSRO has done in this space, and they have done a research paper on this system, and that is in the public domain.
Well, just in the interest of time and everybody's patience, I am interested in that, but if you could give me that on notice, I will read that when it comes through. I'm interested, before we leave this area, if you've gone down that pathway of not attaching additional conditions as the policy recommends but doesn't oblige, what level of involvement does the Commonwealth then have in the enforcement of those conditions? I would think none. Is that correct?
Senator, if there are no Commonwealth conditions on an individual project, then that leaves us in a space where, as a Commonwealth, we would reserve the right strictly for, there are certain provisions in the Act where we can still step in, but it would be subject to those
So an injunction
provisions.
for significant impacts on matters of NES?
I think Mr. Gaddis would be
Yeah.
able to talk about more
Okay.
explicitly on
All right.
that.
I don't know if the department's used those powers before. Have you
I'm sorry,
taken
Senator,
an
I didn't hear the
injunction
question.
action before? Excuse me.
Senator, what we have done and do on a regular basis is when we have projects that are assessed by states, we will systematically take a look at the conditions that they've imposed and then figure, is there any additional Commonwealth conditions required, or are they fully and adequately addressed by the state?
It's more about the compliance with those conditions as
So
opposed to the content,
okay, so it's compliance with
the conditions. So you've said we don't need to impose extra conditions because your conditions do our job as well as your own.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not then the federal government's responsibility to enforce those conditions, even though they relate to matters of national environmental significance. If the state drops the ball on enforcement, which frequently happens for all sorts of reasons, including the fact that many of them have had staff losses, quite significant, what role can you then have? And I think you've told me you could then use your injunction powers for significant impact on a matter of NES, and I'm interested in how frequently those powers get used, because I couldn't bring to mind any example in the last 15 years of those being used.
Senator, just to clarify, the injunction power would be for a breach of the Act. And I don't think
What other remedy would you
that
have?
would apply. Under the circumstances, there are certain provisions under the Act where there was a significant impact substantially greater than that which was assessed. So if there was
But the impact isn't different, it's just that they haven't complied with the condition.
My
Because it's not
understanding,
your condition, you can't enforce it, so what then?
my understanding of the bilateral approval and assessment process, which Mr Tricurth is going to go through more detailing, is there's a senior officials committee meeting and there's a range of mechanisms where the Commonwealth can raise concerns about non-compliance with conditions with the states and then have them address that.
So you can ask the state to please enforce their own laws. That doesn't fill me with confidence.
Senator, there are 3 steps in the draft conditioning process, and the one we're talking about is the one where the Commonwealth doesn't impose its own condition on over and above the state conditions.
Correct.
There is a second step where the Commonwealth does have a condition that the state conditions must be satisfied, which then provides the Commonwealth with the right to and the power to force compliance or exercise compliance.
Oh, well, can I have an assurance
So-
that that would be the default and preferred option, as opposed to the one where it's totally hands-off?
Well, that depends, again, the way we've been talking about it and discussing with people is a risk-based approach. So
Which
maybe
we
Mr.
don't know
Nixon
about
can
yet
go
because
through.
it's not
But
finished.
that's a risk-based approach.
Okay, will you be making that risk-based approach framework public once it is finished?
Senator, we will be absolutely talking about that framework and how it's developed, et cetera, what the criteria are, et cetera, behind that in a
To the
public way.
public?
To the public.
Yes, okay,
Indeed,
yes,
in
yes.
our compliance management plan, we'll also be indicating, because that is the origin of this, how we're using a risk-based approach to focus on key sectors where we're finding non-compliance issues, so that we're transmitting very clearly and appropriately to the public that we are looking where there is greatest risk. In terms of the question on how we do the risk-based approach with respect to conditioning, as the draft conditions policy talks about, we're looking at the idea that you would impose no conditions where there's a number of elements that would be taken into account, including that our assessment is that the state has done an adequate assessment of the proposed action, that the impact on the matter of national environmental significance would not be significant even if there was non-compliance. So you can understand that for a lot of the large complex projects, that would not be the case. There would be a significant impact or the potential for a significant impact on a matter of national environmental
Otherwise
significance
it
if there
wouldn't
was
have been referred in the
non-compliance.
first place.
Correct. But again, it's taking a look, and you've got to take a look at it in the context of the state assessment and conditions. And the idea being that the test for referral and assessment is that there is a likelihood of a significant impact. That doesn't mean that there's a certainty of a significant impact. And it's through the assessment that often we gain a lot of information and can then determine what the real likelihood of a significant impact is. And that's where that example of 0 conditions could apply, is that
okay.
we're dealing with something relatively low or quite low risk.
Thank you.
The state's done a good job on it. And even if there was non-compliance, we don't think there would be a
Okay,
significant
thank you. I
impact on it.
understand that. That's helpful.
Okay.
Has there been any, either through that risk assessment framework or any other process, any assessment of the capacity of the states to enforce conditions?
Senator, I think we've answered in other Senate estimates sessions that what we're focused on is ensuring that the states have a robust system for adequately addressing matters of national
What's written down is one thing. I'm
significance.
talking about whether they have the capacity to enforce that.
Senator,
Has anyone looked at that?
again, our focus is wholly on the adequacy of the state processes to effectively manage matters of national environmental significance.
Well, I'm going to take that as a no, but I don't want to verbal you. Have you looked at their capacity to enforce their own legal systems that you're accrediting?
Senator, we've ensured that they have an adequate system for addressing matters of national environmental significance.
Again, I'm going to take that as a no, so you've got a chance to dissuade me from that conclusion.
I think you are inferring an answer that I haven't given.
Well, I'm trying to get an answer from you, and I'm still not clear on what you're saying. I understand you've looked at the laws. I'm asking if you've done an assessment of the capability of the state government to enforce those laws.
Senator, we do take a look, again, at the adequacy of the state's processes to protect matters of national environmental significance. We do not do, for example, a head count of how many people are doing what activities
You haven't
in
looked
each
at staff
jurisdiction.
losses. Okay, thank you. That is a bit of extra information.
So we do work with the states, as all regulators do, around compliance and how to improve compliance. And that's a regular theme that would come up in work through workshops or other opportunities. So the risk assessment tools, environment regulatory agencies share that and talk about how they go about that. So there's always an aim for how do you improve your practice, how do you define best practice. I don't really leave the answer. The answer is not no. The idea that we're doing this blind of whether there's a formal set of headcount numbers and other things, not formally on headcount, but we do regular work with our counterparts in states and territories around compliance, and that's a natural part of any regulatory agency.
Sure, as it should be, but given the number of staff losses, I would have thought it's become not just an ancillary point, but in fact the main point.
Well, the staff numbers are one thing, but frankly it's the competence and ability and the other frameworks, the risk assessment frameworks in place, how are they used, that's the thing that
Also need
matters.
people to put them in
And that's
place.
where the focus of the cooperation with the states and territories is. And that's a mutual thing. It's back and forth between jurisdictions.
To expand on the Secretary's comments, we have a regular program of capacity building with the states so that we can ensure that where they think that they would benefit from sharing their experiences on different elements of the EPBC Act and how to implement that in as most effective way as possible, we have very much indicated a willingness to do that in a systematic way with any jurisdiction that is interested in doing that.
And they need that because they've lost all their people.
And jurisdictions do that with us. So that they go through their models, for example.
And you've lost some of your people too.
Well, the thing is the
quarter of your
capacity of
staff.
people. So that's a back and forth. It's a two-way process.
Everyone's
with the states,
real nice
and
to each
quite
other,
quite
and
detailed,
everyone's still
quite
sacked. I get it.
detailed work.
Okay.